Awesome. Well, welcome. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to our Monarch Butterfly Conservation Webinar Series. Today's webinar is our Trinational Monarch Butterfly Conservation, and it is presented by Dr. Greg Mitchell from Canada, representing Canada, Ryan Drum from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and Adriana Valera from the World Wildlife Federation in Mexico. My name is Alyssa Taylor. I'm Program Coordinator with Monarch Joint Venture. I'm joined today by Jenna Tatz, who's Education Coordinator, also with Monarch Joint Venture. So if you are having any tech issues, we will be one of the ones to handle that. Please feel free to reach out. We want to thank our sponsors today for their support for this webinar series. Our supporting sponsor, Reinvent Your Waste, and our community sponsors, East Central Energy, Hedgerow Farms, and NiSource. We appreciate your support and dedication to Monarch Conservation and helping us continue this awesome webinar series for everybody. Before we get started, though, I do want to just go through a few community guidelines for the webinar. During this webinar, we are going to use the Q&A box. So that's found at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be collecting questions throughout this session. So we'll be addressing questions at the very end. So we'll go through everybody's presentations and address questions at the end. You also have options to upvote your questions as well if you see something that you were interested in asking also. Since we do have 3 presenters today, if you do have a specific question for someone, please make sure to try and type that into your question as well. If it's a general question, that's totally fine also. Feel free to use the reactions during the presentation. Speakers will be able to see those, and we know you guys are listening and paying attention and enjoying yourselves. So those are also found at the bottom of your screen as well. This webinar is also recorded, and it's going to be posted on our website by Friday of this week. So the entire Monarch Conservation Webinar Series is actually archived and is free and available to watch. Contains 9 years worth of Monarch Conservation webinars on our website. So please feel free to gain more knowledge, or if you missed one or you want to go back and reference something, they're all available for you. If you're joining us today, but you didn't pre-register for the webinar, we would like to count you as present, and so that we're able to follow up with you. Please email learn@monarchjointventure.org with your name and email address so that we can follow up with you as well. We're pleased to announce that we also have translated captions on this Zoom call. If you'd like to add captions, the way you're going to do that in a language other than English is that you will go to the More button at the bottom of your Zoom call. You can click on Captions, and you can choose My Caption Language, so whichever language that you choose. This only changes the captions for you, so you don't have to worry about it changing captions for anyone else either. And finally, all of our speakers represent their own viewpoints, which are not necessarily those of the Monarch Joint Venture. And without further ado, I'm going to quit rambling on, and I'm going to introduce our speakers today. Our first speaker we are delighted to have is Adriana Valera. Over the last 17 years, her professional activities have focused on addressing biodiversity and natural resources conservation challenges in Mexico. As a World Wildlife Foundation Mexico's pollinator officer for terrestrial ecosystems programs, she oversees the monarch butterfly conservation actions that the WWF is developing for the preservation of this amazing species. Adriana has been enthusiastic about monarchs conservation since she started working on the monitoring of overwintering colonies as a consultant for WWF's Monarch Butterfly Program, where she helped to implement the Monarchs overwintering colonies systemic monitoring protocols in 2004 and 2005. She's a bachelor's of biology from the National Autonomous University of Mexico and a bachelor's and a master's in the human dimensions of natural resources from the Colorado State University. Following Adriana, we have Ryan Drum, who serves as the lead scientist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Center for Pollinator Conservation. He works to focus on advancing science-based conservation solutions for butterflies, bees, and other pollinators. Ryan is a member of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Monarch Butterfly Species Status Assessment core team, and he also serves as the U.S. chair of the Trinational Monarch Conservation Science Partnership. And last but not least, we also have Dr. Greg Mitchell. He's a research scientist with the Wildlife Research Division of the Science and Technology branch of the Environment and Climate Change Canada, and is a federal representative of the Trinational Monarch Conservation Science Partnership. Dr. Mitchell's research program is focused on the drivers and population decline in migratory birds and species at risk in human-dominated ecosystems, including the monarch butterfly. And we are super excited to have everyone on board today. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Adriana Valera to kick us off.
Thank you, Alisa. I will share my presentation. So please let me know. You are watching it already? Okay. Yep, perfect.
Looks great.
So, hello, everyone. Thank you very much to the Monarch Joint Venture for having us in this seminar. I think it's going to be very interesting for you all. And I will talk a little bit about the monitoring of the winter colonies conservation of monarchs in Mexico. I am representing, as Lisa said, I am pollinator officer at the World Wildlife Fund in Mexico. And well, let's get started with the presentation. Well, I need to talk about first Dr. Urquhart and his wife. All the story of the monarch butterfly conservation in Mexico starts with them. You know, they just like dedicated their lives to start looking where the monarchs went in the winter from Canada to where. No, they were asking this question all the time. So it was very interesting for them because they started doing a lot of research and a lot of activities to get to know where the monarchs went in the winter. So they started with a tagging program, and in 1975, let me see, it's not changing. In 1975, they just like, after a couple of announcements in different newspapers, they came to meet Catalina Aguado and Kenneth Booger. They were living in Mexico to know where the monarchs were. They started looking for the places where the monarchs arrived after like following the monarchs for a long trip from Canada to Mexico. So these two people in Mexico, they discovered the Santuario in Cerro Pilon. This sanctuary was discovered in January the 2nd, and it was the very first place where the monarchs were all congregated and where we could know that the monarchs were. So in 1975, this is the cover of the National Geographic magazine in 1976, after Dr. Urquhart published his article, Found at Last, the Monarch's Winter Home. After like years and years of trying to find where the monarchs arrived, they could finally get to know these places with the help of the people from the communities, and also with the help of Catalina Aguado and Kenneth Booger, that were doing this amazing trip to get to know where the monarchs were. But in that article, in that moment, Dr. Urquhart didn't mention where the exact places were. So in 1977, Dr. Calvert and Dr. Brower, probably a lot of you have known or know a lot about them, they just started with the clues that they read in Dr. Urquhart's article. They just started looking for the places, and in 1977 they published and rediscover the places where the monarchs are, with another article publishing the places where the colonies were found. So right now we know that the monarch butterfly colonies, they are in the Oyamel forests that are also called sacred fir trees. And this is because the branches of the trees are in form like a cross. And they are in the 2,400, 3,500 meters above sea level. So you will see this picture in here is the Rosario forest, Oyamel forest, where historically the biggest monarch butterfly colonies arrived there. So how we started like the protection of the sites in Mexico? Well, after the discovery of the monarch butterfly colonies in 1980, there was this decree from the government, from the Mexican government, where they declare these places where the monarchs arrive as a wild reserve and a refuge zone. But the problem here was that there was no geographic definition of the site, and it was only a protection during the winter. So after that, in 1986, we the government came with the first idea of a monarch, of a reserve, of a protective reserve. And it was a decree that was, as you might see here, like in different polygons. It was all divided. It has no connectivity on it, but it has in the center of this area 3, 4, 5, 6 different core zones that were just like emphasized to have conservation activities and also like educational activities. So in that moment, we have like 16,110 hectares protected, but it wasn't enough. So in 1998, with the support of WWF to the Ministry of Environment, there was this possibility to have a redesign in the reserve. And the reserve is the one that we know right now. It's a decree that came out in 2000 and protects 56,259 acres of land. And you can see that all these green polygon is the core zones of the reserve. We have three core polygons. One that is located in Contepec, that is here in the square in the bottom, like here in the top square of the screen. And we have the other two polygons that are here in the center. All the yellow polygons, it's the buffer zone. In this zone, there are permitted activities of forest use under certain management programs. And because all this land is people's land, no, 50%, a little bit more of 50% of the Mexican territory is zoned by people from the ejidos and indigenous communities. So the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve is really like owned by these people. So it's been difficult, the conservation of these areas, but we have been doing a lot of advance in this terminology. You know? Another thing that came out when the monarchs were discovered and with all these like initiatives to protect the monarchs were that the monarch in Mexico is listed in this norm that is like the red list in Mexico. It's the NOM 059 of Semarnat, and the monarch is listed under special protection. Is also listed in the agreement of priority species for conservation as a species with high priority for conservation. So in Mexico, we have all these interesting initiatives. This is the Monarch Butterfly region. You might probably have visited some of these places. There are sanctuaries. The sanctuaries are the names of the mountains where the monarchs arrive in each of these mountains. So we have 13 sanctuaries in the Monarch Butterfly region. All these like, I don't know, like light yellow polygon is the Monarch region, but there are a lot of natural protected areas that coincide with the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve that is here in the center. So we have 7 sanctuaries inside the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve, and there are other 7 that are outside. And in all these places, we have found colonies historically along all the years that we have been monitoring the colonies in Mexico. And this region is also very, very important because of the water production. No, we have a lot of basins, water basins that are in these sites. And we have also the Cutzamala system. In Mexico, the Cutzamala system is the water system that provides water to pretty much all the people in Mexico City and the state of Mexico and all the surrounding areas. So about 6 million people get benefits from this forest of the Monarch Biosphere Reserves and the water that is catch through them. So what about the monitoring of the monarch butterfly colonies? Well, I have to talk first. Eduardo Rendon, you might probably have met him in some point in different talks and presentations. He's the lead of the Terrestrial Ecosystems Program in WWF Mexico. And also he's in Mexico, the monarch butterfly expert in all what has to do with the monarchs in Mexico. So he's the lead in the monitoring of the overwintering colonies. He came out with this systematic monitoring protocol and with some people that shared with him the coordination. And you can see here the rest of the team in the beginning or that have been participating in the monitoring along all these years. No, you can see here Martin. Martin has 22 years participating in the monitoring of the monarch butterfly colonies. He is from one of these agrarian properties inside the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve that is called La Mesa. We also have Genaro. Genaro is part of CONAMP. CONAMP is the National Commission for Natural Protected Areas. And these two organizations, WWF and CONAMP, have been monitoring the sites, the overwintering sites and the overwintering colonies since 2004 with the systematic protocols. So along those years, we have been like going and coming and going a lot of people. Like here in the bottom is Servando, that he was part of the initial team, and it's also myself there, like in the same team. So these protocols started in 2004, the systematic measure of the colonies, because the measuring of the colonies started in 1993, but it wasn't systematic until 2004. So we have the way we measure the colonies is as an indirect measure. So we locate the colony in the field, and we started with locating the tree that is highest in the slope, and from there we just start measuring a polygon through like a direction and distance, like just taking those measures to create the polygon after that in an geographic information system. So we have the location of the polygon, we have the polygon. These measures are taken from the first day to December to March. So the entire season where the monarchs are in Mexico, we measure all these colonies. And it's very interesting, and it's demanding, and it's this is a methodology that came out with Dr. Calvert. So we just like adapt the protocols, the methodology in the field after like doing some testings. And the numbers that you might all know, that are those numbers that are known in probably the beginning of the year, in every year, are those taking the second half of December. So those are the ones that are reported because the colonies are already there. They are pretty much stable, and that's the number that it's get to know to the people. So every tree is marked with a band with the name of the tree and with also the date. And this is how you can see a colony when it's a very good like number of monarchs in the colony. You can see a colony like this in the field, in the ground. And sometimes it's just like very difficult to get to them. It's very difficult to sometimes if there are like huge numbers of monarchs, we need to go and get there very early so we don't like disturb the monarchs, so we can have a very precise measure of the polygons. So this is the graphic that I was talking about previously. This graphic has numbers from 1993 to the last season that was 2023-2024. As you can see, we started the systematic monitoring, as I was saying, in 2004. So that was the first time we implement the systematic protocol in the field. But after that, we have all these measures, and we have been seeing, as you could see in the last season, that the populations are probably declining. So I am not going to take more in this. We have challenges for sure. We have a lot of them. We have been seeing like variations in climate, the avocado people like doing cultures in there, this situation with illegal logging, etc. And but we are doing something, and we are doing things to revert this situation. One of the things we are doing is the monitoring of the forest canopy. So we could see, or we can see that at least this last season, the causes of affectation in this canopy forest surface was because of natural causes principally. Well, natural causes, illegal logging and sanitation cutting, but illegal logging was really, really low. No, we didn't have fires as the last year. And we also have been doing things to reforest the forest. We have been reforesting 21,000, reforested hectares in this in the priority forests for the monarch butterfly, but also in the surroundings. And with 21.6 million trees that were planted, and 20 million of those were produced in the community-based nurseries that WWF have been supported in all these last years. Now, we just like went over and we increased our scope of action in the flyway in Mexico. We are working right now since 2018 with a group that is emphasized in conserving the flyway in Mexico through the social monitoring, the scientific monitoring. Also, you can see these monarchs here are places where a systematic protocol of monitoring was established. So we have that, and all these blue points are pollinator gardens that we are establishing in the monarch migratory route, just to attend their needs of food and resources. So what we are also doing, we are helping to produce these plants. We are supporting people from Mexico State and from Michoacan State right now. We have these two pilot projects where they are producing native plants. They have a capacity in Mexico State of 10,000 plants of 30 native species. We are promoting them to produce native pollen, nectar, and pollen-rich flowers for pollinator gardens, principally the monarchs, but it also helps all the rest of migratory and resident populations of pollinators. And well, I needed to run, so thank you very much. This is the incredible team of WWF Mexico in the Terrestrial Ecosystem Program. We are all like doing a lot of things with all our force and all our capacity to get the monarchs to be healthy again as a population. Thank you very much. And I would like to give the space to Ryan. Ryan Rom is the next, so I will just like stop sharing here. And
as Ryan is sharing his screen, I just want to quickly say thank you to Adriana, and thank you to everyone for giving the reactions. I love seeing all of that.
Okay, you able to see that? Sorry, it didn't jump in at the starting slide. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, sounds great.
All right, thank you for that great presentation, Adriana. Thanks to MJV for offering to host us today. It's an honor to be here and part of this, honor to be working in this field and to be alongside these presenters today talking about trinational collaborations for Monarch, and as I'm going to discuss also the broader universe of pollinator conservation that's moving along with that, and in many ways received a huge spark and catalyst from Monarch over recent years. One of the things that really strikes me, Adriana, and hearing more of that history of, you know, how all of this, the state of the science, the state of conservation for Monarch in Mexico especially, has come to evolve over 50 years. It's like pretty amazing to think, you know, really just understanding the nature of the migration and where they go really kind of happened about 50 years ago. And here we are now with Monarch arguably among the most studied insects in the world, and how much has happened in a matter of decades, how much we've learned, how much we still have to work on, of course, and all of the people that have been involved in that and their stories and careers and contributions. It's just an enormous collaborative space, and it continues to be an honor to do to be a small part of that and to continue to carry that legacy forward. So as was mentioned in my introduction, I'm Ryan Drum. I am the lead biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Center for Pollinator Conservation. I also lead a lot of our Monarch science work for the Fish and Wildlife Service. And in doing so, it gives me a unique vantage point that I wanted to reflect on a little bit today with you all and share some of the things that I'm seeing as this whole field continues to evolve. And of course, Monarch is a big part of that. It's a big deal, and I don't say that simply because I'm here presenting today with the Monarch Joint Venture, but truly for our agency and what we've come to see with Monarch, it's incredibly powerful. Of course, we have our own connection points in the management of our public land base across the National Wildlife Refuge System here in the U.S. We also work to cover responsibilities, regulatory responsibilities under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. But beyond that, it is an amazing vehicle to reach the public. It is a driver of collaboration. It is a driver of innovation. So for all of these things, I think we've come to realize over the past decade or so, where the Fish and Wildlife Service has really been aggressively involved, you could say, in monarch conservation, we come to see it as a flagship for conservation much more broadly. Now, with respect to the listing decision, it's often of interest to many folks how that's playing out, the timelines and implications of this. I just wanted to note quickly that it has been found warranted but precluded for protections under the Endangered Species Act here in the United States. And we are anticipating a listing determination. Basically, that means it was warranted to be listed, yet precluded by other higher priority needs under the Endangered Species Act. We're now coming up to a review of that decision that occurs annually in the meantime, and we would anticipate no later than December 4th, under the current arrangements of this year, that at that point, if still warranted, a proposed rule would be published in the Federal Register, at which point it would lay out and initiate a 1-year review process, a public commentary period. So it would be a proposed draft rule at that time that would describe any potential regulatory implications of that decision. Again, if still deemed at that time to be warranted for listing. Of course, we're doing everything we can across the 3 countries, at least trying to make it so that wouldn't be necessary. Here you can see one example of our trinational collaborations, the Trinational Monarch Conservation Science Partnership, a group that's been working together across the 3 countries, across federal agencies, academia, non-governmental organizations, state agencies, provincial representatives, the sort of the full community, as many of you reflect here listening today. This was one of many meetings where we've gotten together to really work to advance the state of the science. It is really what it's all been about, to share information, to try to be as consistent as we can across the countries and how we're doing our monitoring, as well as to identify places where we really think it's important to move the science ahead and then get after it together. So we have a long history at this point established in doing that. We most recently met in Mexico in February of this year to continue these conversations, and collectively we've generated dozens of scientific publications, peer-reviewed publications, which are of course central to informing our species status assessment, our listing decisions, and of course any solutions that we're trying to formulate going forward is really based on this collective and highly collaborative group of work, including some of whom are pictured here, and many others are involved, of course. Now, zooming out a little bit, pollinators more broadly, of course, Monarch are one, but here in the United States, it's a much more diverse universe of pollinators with around 750 species of butterflies, over 4,000 species of native bees, somewhere around 11,000 species of moth and flies, wasps, beetles, bats, hummingbirds, and other species also contributing. So this realm it's equally stunning in terms of how iconic these species are, the diversity and the ability to utilize, the beauty and the interactions between pollinating plants, flowers, and insects and other pollinators is this whole universe of ways to reach people and inspire, you could say, the next generation of conservationists across our 3 countries. We know pollinators are important. They're important for basic ecosystem functions, their food. They, of course, pollinate many kinds of plants. They are central to our agricultural systems, our food security, our economy, our climate resilience going into new futures and many unknowns. And generally, they're indicators of ecosystem health. Now, we also know there are many other pollinators beyond monarch that either are listed in some cases or under consideration or at risk, more broadly speaking, many of whom are reflected in this poster from the Pollinator Partnership. Specifically to butterflies, skippers, and moths, we have 40 species currently listed in the United States, and a whole slate and a growing kind of pace to what we're encountering across particularly insects. In this case, you can see the list of upcoming species under consideration for additional protections under the Endangered Species Act for butterflies. And for bees, we have 7 species of endemic bees in Hawaii and an additional 2 bumblebee species listed, with more, and you'll note especially bumblebee species on the list that's growing under consideration for listing decisions here in the US again. bumblebees probably kind of harbingers of broader bee concerns, and that they're generally easier to identify and there's more data available. And again, relative to bees, the same could be said of butterflies, with more data and more easily identified, generally speaking. And it's not unique to insects. We also see alarming trends with birds. In this case, insectivorous birds, aerial insectivores being a disproportionate declining guild within this State of the Birds report. So we're seeing, signs indirectly as well of insect declines and its impact on other elements of our ecosystems. Now, why is this? Well, it's complicated, and this paper that published in 2021 by Dave Wagner and others does a good job of describing it. We could look similarly at Monarch and see there are many kind of intertangled factors driving these declines, and I won't attempt to break it all down today, but generally habitat loss, pesticides, climate change, there are disease and pest elements and other factors as well. But what you generally see is it's a large, noisy mix of many different things combined, and of course, unique in some cases to particular species situations. Now, can be a little overwhelming, but I guess another way to think about this is there's all of these different types of problems we're dealing with, which means there's all of these different avenues for potential solutions and improvements on the more optimistic spin of that. And I think generally speaking, here's another good paper for those maybe not as versed in the science and publications in this field, but Matt Forrester, Emma Pelton, and Scott Black make a compelling case here. We can continue to study these things. We have really only leaned into this space for a matter of decades at best for most of these species to really understand status and trends. But what we're seeing is that we know enough to understand, the general principles of what we need to do. We do need to continue to study them and better understand what's going on and how to solve it. But we're well positioned to make extensive progress in this field. And so that's what we're working to do. And that's really when I see a new era of conservation, when I make that claim that we're sort of on the brink of it, or we're at the frontiers and forefront of a great amount of change in this space. Well, here's an example from a meeting a couple summers ago now that was hosted by Senator Jeff Merkley to really rally around monarch conservation and to try to essentially look at the science, to bring scientists together and formulate science-based solutions to drive conservation actions. And that's what we've been doing. That's similar to the recent meeting in Mexico discussing the same things across the three countries. What do we know? All right, let's take a hard look at that, at what it tells us, and what do we need to do with our senior and executive leaderships, in this case, congressional representatives, at the table, listening and then helping to determine what's possible to drive new actions. In that particular moment, this is our Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, who attended the meeting and announced the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would establish a National Center for Pollinator Conservation. So I'm happy to report that's happened. We are doing that. We now exist. It's been about a year or so. And you can see here a glimpse to what our current team is looking like, with Nicole Alt now appointed as our director. The other team here, I won't walk through all of us. We're growing. There are others in the mix too who are in temporary roles. And so, it's a starting point for us. And I think in many ways reflects kind of a new center, not just a center as a title, but a center for these issues to be considered, to have voices, leadership, coordination within our agency, helping to emanate and taking these issues seriously at the same level of managing, to some degree, trying to at least bring it up to the level of a migratory bird program, a national fisheries program. We now have this dedicated home and space to think about pollinators, including monarch, and how to really advance this field collaboratively with all of you. So there's a few quick themes. I know I'm running short on time here, so I just want to highlight kind of the spaces we're working in, of course, driving and empowering existing collaborations, developing new collaborations, working to engage the public, and really advance and apply the science we already have or advance new science in many cases. Some quick examples of places we're investing, of places we're working: social science, social network analysis, understanding who's engaged in the different ways levers might be utilized to drive change and engagement, or watching how things react amongst social systems to our attempts to drive change in this space. A variety of inventory and monitoring across our public land base, and also working with others, including things like the integrated Monarch monitoring program led by the Monarch Joint Venture, but also just trying to understand even baseline data on what's out there for native bees and butterflies is kind of our starting point as where we're prioritized for now. We're working with MJV on deploying technologies like the drone-based habitat assessment to really try to scale up and go faster with technologies that can look at milkweed densities and the effects of our management actions reflected by that, and now thinking about also nectar resource evaluations using similar technologies. We're also looking at eDNA and how we can utilize that to detect target species or communities of bees or butterflies that are otherwise difficult to survey in many cases. We're also working with industry and through public-private partnerships and looking and working with farmers, trying to explore ways to really kind of target where we apply chemicals in the landscape, ways to reduce the impacts of those, ways to plan more strategically and try to track the positive contributions that farmers in the agricultural sector can and are making in this space. A couple last things. We're looking at a large-scale assessment. This was funded by the USGS and Fish and Wildlife Service together to look at the status of butterflies in the US across the hundreds of species that I mentioned earlier, as many of those as possible. And we're in the latter stages of a multi-year effort to try and illuminate the trends that we're seeing across those. And that's under review for publication currently, the first state of that work. A lot of this has been led by Dr. Cheryl Schultz out of Washington State University. I want to give her a shout out. Xerxes Society actively involved, many others, Elizabeth Crone at UC Davis, and many other collaborators in the mix on this. I don't have time to mention entirely now, but big collaborative effort again reflected here. We're working on bee data. This, again, a trinational effort here to identify all the native bee observations that have been digitized and are publicly available, and bring that visual to light, make it dynamic, allow us to interact and access these data and understand what they tell us about, in this case, phenology, trends over time, different taxonomic groups you might be interested in. So this is thebeetool.org. And again, a shout out to the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, who's helped fund a project to drive this tool development trinationally. So in conclusion, we're at this kind of tipping point that I see in a good way, I think, for the most part, although driven by many concerning aspects with respect to the declines of pollinators that we're observing, generally speaking. But we're at a moment where we're starting to see it all more clearly, that we're able to visualize it. We're working to bring together a lot of these data so we can see status and trends and understand what to do about it. And with that comes, I think, a recognition of these issues, the significance and importance of them. And we're seeing this push to take the science and turn it into action with a sense of urgency and a sense of dedication from leadership at levels that range from local to national to congressional to trinational. And I think with this, you're seeing a greater durability being built around this issue. I'm hopeful that we're symbolizing that with our establishment of the Center for Pollinator Conservation here in the US. We see other indications trinationally as well. And with that comes innovation through technology, innovation also in how we're working together, the ways we're working together, and the general spirit and manifestation of collaboration that's really been driving this and will continue to drive our successes together going forward. And with that, if you'd like more information, here's our website. Feel free to reach out by email. I'd be happy to talk further or answer any questions after I hand it over to Greg for the Canadian view of things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. I'm just gonna launch my talk here, share my screen. Can you hear me okay?
Sound great.
Thank you. Oh, you don't want to see my R screen. Let me fix that.
We can see your presentation.
Oh, you can see my presentation? Perfect.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Yep, my name is Greg Mitchell. I'm a research scientist with the Canadian federal government, and I'm very honored to be here. Monarch Joint Venture does a tremendous amount of amazing work for monarch butterfly conservation, and I'm happy to be sharing some updates on what's going on with monarch conservation in Canada. So I just wanted to start by acknowledging that Canada has recently lost one of its, what I think of. I've only met Darlene once, but I've had lots of email communication with her. She was in, I believe she was in that picture that Ryan showed of the Trinational Monarch Conservation Science Partnership, but she was a champion for monarch butterflies in Canada, especially at Point Pelee National Park, where she was involved in censusing these large congregations of monarchs that we have along the north shore of Lake Erie. So I will dedicate this presentation to Darlene today. Thank you. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of how we do monarch conservation science within the federal government. And I can't acknowledge everybody that's involved, but I'll try to shout out some people when I can. There's a core group of us working on monarch recovery, and those people are Elizabeth Shapiro, Holly Bickerton, Renee Terza, and Krista Holmes, and myself. And we kind of lead a core group. We meet monthly to talk about monarch conservation and our efforts and results of studies, etc. I don't work for the Canadian Wildlife Service. They're really in charge of policy and monitoring of wildlife. I'm part of the science and technology branch, and my job is to provide science advice to the Canadian Wildlife Service about monarch conservation, and also to conduct research that helps support some of their decision making. So this is the species at risk kind of process in Canada, and a little cartoon that I made here. It starts with a group called COSEWIC, the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. They're not a government organization. They work at arm's length from the government. There might be government people or scientists, biologists that are part of COSEWIC, but it's also comprised of members of the public and academia, people that work for environmental NGOs, as well as Indigenous knowledge holders. What they do is once a year, they make assessments, they decide what species they're going to assess, they use quantitative criteria to make listing recommendations, they follow the IUCN criteria, and they submit these recommendations to the federal government. And then those are at the top, there's a list of the different threat categories. Once the government receives that, typically, this is the typical timeline now that we try to hold. The Minister of Environment, Climate Change Canada has 90 days to post a response statement on our public registry online for species at risk. Essentially, what that response statement is a plan for consultations with experts and the public about the species in question. So they have 90 days to post a plan. The consultations are supposed to take up to a year, and sometimes they take a lot longer if it's a species with a complicated life history and biology, like the monarch butterfly. And then after a year, it's the decision or recommendation is made by the minister to the government in council, which is appointed by the Governor General in Canada and the cabinet of the current government. And they make a decision on whether they're going to adhere or they're going to accept the listing recommendation by COSEWIC and that Environment Canada has supported. They can decide to send it back to COSEWIC for reassessment if they don't think the assessment was done properly or they think there's new information that needs to be considered. Also, what can happen is they might not make a decision in a timely manner. The federal government can then just go ahead and list it on its own after a 9-month period. Or the Environment and Climate Change Canada, the minister can go ahead and list it on its own. So that's the process. This is how it's actually shaken out in terms of timelines. Monarch was listed under our Species at Risk Act as special concern in 2003. We published a management plan for the monarch butterfly in 2016. Also at the same time, COSEWIC reassessed the monarch butterfly as endangered. So that was the recommendation they put forth to the government. We needed extended consultations with members of the public and Indigenous communities about any listing decisions. And then it took a while to go through those consultations and digest that information and understand it. And then we made a recommendation at the end of May, June to the governor and council, or the Canadian government, essentially, that it should be uplisted to endangered. And in December 2023, it was uplisted to endangered under the Species at Risk Act. And what criteria was used for this endangered listing? It was based on the rate of decline at the time. So it would have been 10 years prior to 2016. That's what COSEWIC used, and they decided that based on the rate of decline from 2006 to 2016, the population on the wintering grounds had been reduced by greater than 50%, and that warranted the endangered listing decision. So what happens now? Now that it's been officially listed as endangered under a Species at Risk Act, we have a year to develop a recovery strategy. That's where some of the science I'm working on fits in. And then we have an action plan that we need to have written a year after that. So we're kind of on this 2-year timeline here to get everything in order in terms of how Canada. So the recovery strategy are things that we need to do to recover the monarch butterfly. The action plan is how we're actually going to accomplish those things. So some things to note about our Species at Risk Act. It only applies to federal lands. Okay, so this is often a misconception about, oh, monarchs listed as endangered, I can't, it's going to affect how I can do things on my private land. That's not the case. It only protects the species, at least initially, on federal lands. And I have a map here of protected lands by different land managers, rights holders, stakeholders, etc. And the light green is kind of the federal government protected areas. You can see a lot of them are in the north. There's not a lot down in Southwest Ontario, around the Great Lakes, which is the core range of monarchs in Canada. So there's a lot of private land down there. And so the government actually looks to the provinces to protect species at risk in their lands. But we are advocating for a stewardship first approach. That is, we're making recommendations about how monarch can be conserved on private lands, and we're hoping to convince the public that it's the best interest of the species and also of other pollinators. So what have we done to date in terms of investment for conservation? It's a little complicated because there's pots of money all over the place, but we've invested directly through, largely through our habitat stewardship program, which is money that anybody can apply for to help conserve monarch butterflies or restore habitat. We've invested about $8.4 million in habitat restoration. So this is over 70 projects, over 4,500 hectares. It has been enhanced, and over 3,300 hectares has been secured. All that will benefit the monarch, but there's other pots of money. There's something called a Nature Legacy Fund. This has provided $155 million for on-the-ground conservation activities for all species at risk across Canada. And then $175 million was invested in establishing 17% of freshwater areas and terrestrial areas each as receiving protection by the federal government across Canada. And then there's been an additional $100 million on top of that to get us up to 25% of terrestrial land area and freshwater area. So significant investments. Through our stewardship-based approach, we're working with lots of valuable partners. Two of them are here. We have a large rights-of-way pollinator habitat program that's really being led by the Canadian Wildlife Federation. They're doing tremendous work restoring habitat. I think it's over 700 hectares of restored habitat along roads. A lot of that's in Eastern Ontario, but this program will likely only continue to build. And then we've also been, we've developed two monitoring programs, one that's for the general public, Mission Monarch, that's been developed through the Montreal Insectarium. And then we've also developed Mission Monarch Expert, which will be released shortly. And this is the same program as the Integrated Monarch Monitoring Program in the US. And so it's basically a sister program to that program, and it's apples to apples in terms of data that's being collected. So you can, I think I have a link for Mission Monarch later in the talk. You can view it through there, but that's administered through the Montreal Insectarium with support from Environment Canada. And then we're also working on a Canadian native seed strategy with the Canadian Wildlife Federation again, a huge partner for Monarch Conservation in Canada. And this is looking at kind of the value, looking at the supply chain, of how we can generate enough native seed to do all the restoration activities we want to for monarch and pollinators. And it's also actually providing a lot of opportunities for Indigenous reconciliation and involvement in terms of seed collection, et cetera. So I'm not working on that personally, but I'm really excited to see where that's going. I'm just quickly going to I guess, highlight our two monitoring programs. So the original Mission Monarch program, this is like a really easy to use web-based application for collecting information on monarchs and milkweed and eggs and caterpillars. And it's also what we use for our Monarch Blitz that occurs across all three countries in August, late July, early August. And then we also have Mission Monarch Expert, and it's a sampling approach, again, based off our, this is the great thing about working across borders with scientists in the US and Mexico, is we can learn a lot from them. And so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can leverage existing expertise. And this is one of the things we've done. We've have this kind of semi-randomized stratified sampling program in place now. And those are some of the surveys that we've completed to date. And the bluer area is not surveyed, but we're hoping to get there. And this actually extends right across the monarch range in Canada. Okay, one of the things I've been working on is, do we have enough milkweed in Canada to support monarch population recovery? This is basically building off a paper that Wayne Thogmartin published for the US Midwest, which I refer to as the all hands on deck paper. But this is for the common milkweed range within Canada. And we estimated if we had enough common milkweed to support what we think the monarch population is within this range. And our numbers suggest that we need to increase milkweed by 1.67 times. So we might not, this is to support the Trinational recovery target. We have enough milkweed right now for the population that's making it to Canada at the moment, but we need more if we're going to support the 6-hectare Trinational recovery target on the wintering grounds. And this is currently under peer review. One of the things we've done is we've engaged with social scientists, and we said, okay, if we need 1.7 times more milkweed, where do we, who should we be working with in terms of getting that milkweed in the ground? So these are some colleagues from Carleton University and one of their students, plus one of my colleagues from ECCC here. And we basically did a structured guided interview with people that we considered to be they're representative land managers or stewards. And so they could speak on behalf of their memberships. And the good thing is this is just a plot of the willingness to increase milkweed at the bottom and the confidence in the willingness of those sectors or land cover kind of groups to increase milkweed. And what we found was that there's a lot of goodwill towards monarchs across these sectors. And a lot of these circles end up in the top upper right margin or upper right quadrant of this plot, which tells us what we consider them early adopters. And so I'm confident actually and very optimistic that we can increase milkweed numbers just kind of based on the survey effort that we did. And we're still analyzing this data, and hopefully we'll have something out and that can be peer reviewed shortly. A couple other projects I just wanted to highlight. There's a lot of things we're working on. These are just some things I thought you might be interested in. First thing is we're looking at what nectar flowers monarchs are using throughout their entire life cycle in Canada. One of the ways that we did this is we used data from Mission Monarch and iNaturalist. This is on the left with Diana. She was an honors student. And what we did is we looked to see the frequency of photographs of which monarchs were nectaring on flowers. Really cool. The different colors on the plot represent whether it was native, non-native, or if it was kind of from in a garden variety plant. And then we also looked at native and non-native use out in the wild versus availability around the green belt around Ottawa. So this work is it's being written up or it's out for peer review right now. I just wanted to say thank you to all the community and citizen scientists that contribute data to iNaturalist and things like Mission Monarch. Here's a couple other projects I just want to quickly highlight. They're both master students projects. On the left, we have Manon. What she did is we brought in different native and non-native flower species into the greenhouse, and we let monarchs forage on them, and then we looked to see how much fat they gained. And we found that there was differences across different flower species. And so this is just evidence that, not all flowers are the same. And so it's something we should be thinking about when we're thinking about restoration. This other part we did is we had these portable greenhouse units and we put them over flowers and we artificially warmed flowers as a climate change experiment. And what we found is that when we increased the temperature that flowers grew under for the course of the growing season, the flowers ended up not growing as large. The nectar quality was lower in terms of sugar content, and as a result, the monarchs were able to put on less fat. So this is something we're going to continue to explore moving forward, and it also speaks to our need when we're planting or thinking about flowers to plant. I don't have the answers right now, but we should be considering climate change when we're thinking about restoration activities. Just in summary, based on my research, and it's actually a team of researchers, it's not just me, Canada needs more milkweed to support monarchs, especially the trinational target, our share of the target. And just to put this in perspective, we think 17% of the fall migratory population of monarchs is originating in Canada. And after you account for survival, maybe 10% of the monarchs on the wintering grounds are from Canada. That's kind of the numbers we're working with. We need more community science data. There's not a lot of data. The reason why I only estimate how much common milkweed there is because that's the only data there is. We don't know anything about the other milkweed species. So we need more survey data of these different milkweed species and how much there is out there. And then we're exploring best options right now in terms of what flowers we should be recommending for restoration activities. My closing thoughts are, I like this idea that monarchs are part of our shared natural heritage between Canada, the US, and Mexico. Like, it connects all of us, community members, citizens, researchers, doesn't matter. We all get a lot of joy and enthusiasm at a monarch. So we need to continue to work together. we can make a difference through small actions, like having wild native flowers in your gardens or milkweed can make a difference. And I say that to every time I give a talk to anybody, you little bit of and even if it maybe monarchs don't have access or there's not enough monarchs to access your garden in this given year, it's going to help other pollinators. Okay, so there's stacked benefits. We need to continue to communicate, share data, share information, expertise. Again, Canada was really fortunate in that we were able to make a lot of advances really quickly because of all the work that came before us from the US. So we've been standing on the shoulders of giants, and it's really helped our conservation initiatives. And I think the future is bright. I think we can get there one milkweed and nectar flower at a time. I got a couple links there. If you're wondering what nectar flowers you should be planting in what regions, I think the Xerces Society does a wonderful job outlining what species those should be. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for listening today and attending the talk, and all the community scientists that submit data to these initiatives. We do rely on it, and it's making a difference. And special thanks to two of my colleagues that helped with some of the slides. Thank you. I'm going to just send it back here.
Thank you so much, Greg, and to all of our presenters, Adriana and Ryan, for sharing all of your knowledge and updates with us. We packed a lot into a very short period of time. We will not get to all of the questions today, I can guarantee that to you, but we did pinpoint a question for each one of you today. And then I do want to just say questions that have been thrown into the Q&A, please know that we will do our best to answer those or reach out to the presenters today to get some answers for you, and that will be included in our follow-up email as well. So just keep that in mind before if we do not get to your questions. So with that, I'm going to work backwards. I'm going to start with Greg, since you just ended. You mentioned that the Species at Risk Act only applies to federal lands, at least initially. What, if there is any, is the progression? Is there any way to protect species on non-federal Canadian lands, for example, private developers?
Yeah, so there is a mechanism. Okay, so yeah, first we present our data and our assessment to the provinces and territories, but it's provinces in the case of monarchs. And then they decide if they're going to protect the habitat on private lands. And if they decide they don't, but the federal government deems it like absolutely critical or essential to the survival of the species or to prevent extirpation, then there is something called an emergency order under our Species at Risk Act, which allows the federal government to trump any decision on federally listed species, and like any decision made by the provinces, and protect the species on private lands. And so what we need to keep in mind, I don't know how many species at risk there are in Canada, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. There's only ever been 4 emergency orders, one for sage grouse, one for western chorus frogs, and 2 for orcas on the West Coast. So it's not a tool the federal government likes to use very often, because no one likes to be told what to do on their lands. And so instead, we have a bunch of initiatives to work with landowners and get the message out about little things folks can do to increase numbers. So I hope that answers the question. That's why I said at least initially, because there is always that option. It's just very rarely enacted.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I definitely think that covers it. And you had a lot of blue dots on that chart that seemed very promising. So I feel like you've got a lot of good efforts going for sure. Ryan, what technologies, for example, radio frequency tags, are being reviewed by the Center for Pollinator Conservation to assess the migration cycle and patterns of the monarch?
Yeah, great question. And I'll be brief because I appreciate those hanging on here for a little extra time, and I'm happy to do so as long as you'd like. But Yeah, that's definitely an area I could have also mentioned, and I appreciate it's a big frontier for technological innovations for Monarch and otherwise. So we're kind of tracking the field generally, no pun intended, just like there's Modus and there's kind of like a menu of options that are getting better, like many things technologically smaller, more powerful, solar powered in some cases, Bluetooth enabled. So kind of depending on the application, there's different things that we're exploring there, but it's an area of, definitely interest and collaboration for us, generally speaking. For example, we had Lee Brown, who's with James Madison University, I believe, who was at our Mexico meeting in February, presenting an update on some of these technologies. In that particular instance, we're tracking like the impact, the behavioral impact on flight and, say, foraging behavior and movement of monarchs once they're tagged. So there's also those layers. You kind of have to understand, like, does it give you an objective or a biased view? What are the limitations? Do you need to set up a special tracking station, or will you only detect them in particular areas? Or like in some cases now, maybe you can take a phone and when you go to an overwintering site in Mexico, potentially be able to detect one of these tags that's Bluetooth enabled if you have the right app. So there's a lot of like room for community involvement in this stuff and further development. So I guess I'll leave it at that that it's an exciting area. I guess one more thing, it's also a technology we're using in beyond Monarch, right? So of course, all sorts of other applications, but one of particular interest is like with bumblebees. They're nesting, they're overwintering, where the queens overwinter in the soil or other cavities and things like that is a huge unknown and often presumably a big limiting factor. So we're also like looking at these technologies to better understand sort of hidden aspects in the data or life histories of some of these other pollinator species as well. So great potential and inevitably something we'll be seeing more of in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. A lot of new tech on the horizon, as always, right? And finally, Adriana, have you seen a shift in the location of wintering monarchs further north due to warmer winters?
I knew that you were going to choose that question. Well, I don't know. Well, not outside the sites that we have already identified with the time, but probably northern in the slope at the beginning of the seasons. This year they were northern than previous years, but not outside the sites that we have been identified in Cyprus.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, because we are right around that 3:15 mark and we just got a ton of great information, I just want to take a moment to thank our presenters one last time. Again, we are going to do our best to get answers to you in the follow-up email, and just remember that this will be recorded as well. So you can always come back and reference the recording. Thank you again to Adriana, Greg, and Ryan for all presenting today. It was fantastic. And thank you all for joining us. We would love to have you fill out our feedback form. So Jenna's going to throw that into the chat for you guys if you could take a moment to do so. And just a reminder that our next webinar will be on May 21st at 1 p.m. Central Time, and it will be Container Gardening with Keystone Plants with Krista DeCook from the Homegrown National Park program. And so we hope you can join us for that. And other than that, thank you all so much and have a fantastic rest of your day.